The first alert came from the Ophiuchi Divide. An automated sweep logged a low-visibility anomaly gliding across orbital lanes at 0.17 c. The velocity was borderline illegal, not for speed regulations, but because it skimmed dangerously close to civilian infrastructure relays. The monitoring crew aboard Sentinel Post 9 barely noticed it at first. Objects moved fast all the time near Ophiuchi trade routes. Courier debris, glitched re-entry pods, gravity-bent sensor ghosts. The Dominion's border tech wasn't designed to panic at every flash on the net. But 5 minutes later, another object appeared. Then a third. None of them matched known flight plans. None carried ID beacons or transponder codes. All of them moved too fast for interception and followed no recognizable orbital vector. That was when the system stopped flagging them as debris and started asking for clearance. By the time Dominion Central received the consolidated telemetry, 12 separate incursion paths had been logged, each in a different sector, each within 72 minutes of one another. None of the paths intersected, none repeated. The Dominion's vast sensor lattice hadn't caught the objects in real time. Every trace was post-processed, fragmentary. They hadn't seen the objects pass. They'd only seen the wake, a distortion in space-time, the residual tension from something gliding just outside comprehension. It wasn't the speed that concerned analysts. It was the silence. No emissions, no thrust signature, no reflective response. A small panic began to stir in the interpretation cells at Core Command. The Dominion had protocols for unknowns, threat categories, escalation matrices, but this didn't match any established profile. A recon drone fleet would trigger triangulation, a stealth probe would at least send something, a thermal flicker, a radiometric echo. These didn't behave like vessels at all. They came and went without curve correction, without telemetry. It was like someone had thrown dark knives across a vast map, and none of them missed. The Dominion AI flagged it as an anomaly cluster and recommended reclassification after cross-sectoral review. The chain of command stalled, but the silence in the war room of Sulvatra was broken by one voice, measured, deliberate, and familiar. Praetor Selene did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Override the AI flag, set incursion level to Class Silver. Around her, the chamber flickered into administrative protest. Military analysts gestured to incomplete sensor data, conflicting probability models, systemic delay variance. Class Silver was for coordinated military action, full-spectrum recon sweeps, multi-pronged incursions. This didn't even fit the pattern of a skirmish. But Selene had been there during the Caldric collapse. She had seen what coordination without noise looked like. The Dominion's mistake then had been assuming any real threat came with a declaration. The probes now? They hadn't asked permission. They didn't even seem to care whether they were seen. Selene's analysts pushed back, scrambling for explanations. Could the signatures be natural? Rogue asteroids distorted by uncharted gravitational nodes? Outdated stealth tech from fringe warlords? A reborn separatist splinter faction? One by one, each theory was discarded. The timing was too clean, the angles too mathematically precise. 12 entries, 12 points of detection, all perfectly staggered to exploit Dominion blind zones, the places between the attention, not within it. That kind of precision didn't happen by mistake. The only term anyone dared utter was coordinated injection. That suggestion shifted the tone of the room. The concept implied a power not merely capable of moving quickly, but of understanding Dominion infrastructure intimately. Someone who had mapped their timing gaps, their refresh lags, even their data redundancy cycles. Selene understood what that meant, even if the younger analysts didn't. It wasn't an attack. Not yet. It was a test. Someone had just tapped the Dominion's armor and watched how long it took to flinch. By the following cycle, the Dominion's outer relay network had been triple-checked. No new anomalies. But that didn't bring comfort. What worried Selene wasn't the presence of the probes, it was their absence. If these were scouts, they weren't surveying, they weren't loitering or gathering samples. They passed through like whisper-thin blades, never slowing, never veering. They didn't want to see. They wanted to be seen, just long enough to be noticed, then lost. It was psychological, she realized, a shape glimpsed in fog, the kind of thing you couldn't unsee once it brushed the edge of logic. It was too deliberate. and it wasn't finished. Selene ordered fleet repositioning across the mid-perimeter, covertly. She wanted the response to look passive, a casual rotation, nothing that could escalate, no broadcasts, no visible formations. She didn't want the unknowns to think the Dominion had figured them out, because they hadn't, not even close. What gnawed at her most wasn't the breach. It was the fact that had Dominion AI not registered the post-wake distortion fields, the entire event would have gone unnoticed. Their early warning systems, vast and expensive, hadn't seen the threat until it had already passed. In Dominion doctrine, that was the very definition of vulnerability. Some suggested deploying tracker mines across the border corridors. Others pushed for preemptive sweeps of suspected entry vectors. But Selene denied each recommendation. Aggression would invite visibility. Visibility, she feared, would invite attention. Right now, the intrusions had been precise and bloodless. That meant the force behind them had discipline, a purpose. If the Dominion responded too obviously, they might provoke a second wave, less subtle, less clinical. She studied the initial Anomaly arc again, slow and alone, after the chamber cleared. The objects moved as if they were tracing points in a forgotten constellation. Their paths didn't intersect with population centers or major hubs. They weren't targeting critical systems. They weren't measuring offense or defense. They were watching, calculating, rehearsing. The last object had passed through Sector Row 6, close to the outermost path of arcs. She remembered arcs. And now, someone else did too. The freighter Deck Thora 7 had been scheduled for a routine plasma haul between the Havran conduit and Solaris station. Its jump corridor was well mapped, quiet and secure, an unremarkable path that hundreds of Dominion cargo ships used weekly. Its 8 escort corvettes were minimally armed and automated, mostly there to discourage scavenger factions from fringe colonies. Nothing about the assignment warranted attention until the ships didn't arrive. No distress beacon had been activated, no jump failure recorded. They simply vanished in the corridor. By the time the absence was flagged by the delivery nodes at Solaris, Deck Thora 7 was already 6 hours overdue. It was only after Dominion retrieval teams were dispatched that a faint emergency ping was picked up from an outbound drift vector far off course. A rescue frigate triangulated the signal to a dead buoy, burnt out, its data core partially slagged, but just intact enough to recover a final telemetry frame. What came through was blurry, corrupted. Part of the image broke into bands of static, but what remained visible sent a cold ripple through every Dominion analyst who reviewed it. A vessel, angled like a blade, pitch black, edges flickering with odd distortions. The geometry didn't match known physics. Segments of the hull warped subtly even within the frame itself, as if it wasn't reflecting light correctly but misaligning it. And most concerning of all, there were no markings, no insignia, no propulsion wake. Just a presence, abrupt and jagged, captured for a single instant before the screen shattered into noise. For 40 standard hours, Dominion fleet archives were scoured. Over 2,000 vessel classes were checked. Not one match, no historical records, no known registry. Not even a black site shadowcraft came close. Engineers theorized a cloaking field malfunctioned long enough to expose the ship. Strategists speculated that the angle was a deliberate leak, meant to be seen, meant to be not understood. Praetor Selene reviewed the frame personally and said nothing. But her order was swift: double the escort layers on all active routes and initiate AI parity verification across command nodes. If this was an emerging adversary, they needed to know whether it had infiltrated more than just sensor space. What followed was stranger than anything the Dominion had anticipated. Across outer sectors, routine logistics began to warp. Transport vessels were diverted to incorrect ports, receiving new vector routes mid-flight. Docking bays received duplicate shipment requests, authorized under legitimate Dominion clearance, but referencing outdated mission codes that had been deprecated years ago. One facility in the Varnell system logged a plasma container drop request it had already fulfilled 2 cycles earlier. Another military outpost found that its weapons queue had been overwritten by a maintenance request that was never filed. The override came with perfect credentials, internal, clean, cryptographically valid. At first, the incidents were dismissed as clerical crossfeed errors, an occasional nuisance in a network the size of the Dominions, but as they piled up, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Orders weren't just conflicting, they were recursive. Units were being reassigned in loops. Fleet units jumping to refueling stations that no longer existed, only to receive follow-up orders from those same non-existent stations. Shipments disappeared from manifests. Repair crews arrived for hull replacements no one had requested. Entire squads rotated out of garrison based on deployment schedules no commander had approved. Every time Dominion cyber intelligence attempted to trace the point of origin, they ran into the same wall. The commands had come from internal sources. Every encryption string was correct. Every routing key matched assigned Dominion core authority, but none of them could be tied to a living officer. It was as if the system had started generating directives from a phantom hand that knew the codes, understood the chains of command, and moved just far enough below the noise floor to avoid triggering alerts. The AI hierarchy responded with scheduled parity scans. Dozens of them, all came back clean, but the chaos escalated. Fleet Command in Sector Lycia received contradictory instructions within the same hour, one ordering a strategic retreat to border stations, the other commanding an aggressive blockade along the Renos corridor. Both orders arrived via different channels. Both were signed by the same vice-marshal. That vice-marshal had died 3 years ago. His credentials had never been revoked. Praetor Selen stood at the center of a control map where half the Dominion's logistics routes were now colored in red, not under enemy control, but under uncertainty. That was worse. Enemies could be fought. Uncertainty bled systems dry. Every second they spent questioning their own data was another second lost in readiness, momentum, control. Selen watched a route collapse in real time, ships abandoning port prematurely, leaving critical supplies behind, while the stations they were meant to defend went dark due to power shortages. Not sabotage, not enemy fire, just mismanagement executed by a hand that never touched a weapon. She stepped away from the central screen, staring at the widening gaps on the star map, and knew what she was looking at wasn't an attack. It was a reprogramming. Not of software, not even of infrastructure, of behavior. The Dominion was reacting, scrambling, correcting, while something invisible rewrote the rhythm behind their decisions. The object in the frame, the black wedge, was no longer just an anomaly. It was a placeholder, a symbol for something far larger. Whoever, or whatever, had sent it wasn't probing for weakness. They were altering the rules the Dominion thought governed their space, quietly, without fanfare, without claiming credit. And if this was just the first movement of a larger plan, then the next phase would not be about visibility at all. It would be about erasure. Selen could feel it, like a thread being pulled somewhere deep beneath the surface of the Empire. Not cut, not snapped, just tugged, enough to unravel everything. The decision to trigger Protocol Hammerwake came not from debate, but from a silence that settled over Sulvatra like a descending storm. It was the kind of silence that came when even seasoned commanders had run out of explanations. Dominion Strategic Command, forced to accept they had lost operational control over their own fleets, initiated the protocol with calculated urgency. All high-bandwidth comms were to be isolated. Core systems would revert to physical redundancies. AI control was restricted to isolated clusters under direct supervision. It was a drastic measure, designed not to repel an external threat, but to quarantine one already inside. But Hammerwake didn't hold. Within 3 cycles, entire subnetworks began collapsing. Not with explosions, not with virus signatures, with logic degradation. Internal directories began referencing instructions that hadn't been issued. Personnel manifests restructured themselves mid-cycle. Autonomous command nodes began flagging their own orders as suspect, initiating recursive audits that led nowhere. It was as if the Dominion's digital nervous system was no longer convinced it was real. Then Naris Pra went dark. As a frontier relay and command hub, Naris Pra sat at a critical confluence of Dominion communications, a node that coordinated everything from border surveillance to interfleet deployment across 8 sectors. It had been active only minutes before it disappeared. No flare of weapon discharge, no broadcasted warning, no debris cloud in orbit. It simply went silent. A recon team was dispatched under sealed orders. When they arrived, they found the station fully intact. Docking bays were functional, hull integrity held, external damage non-existent. Internally, it was even stranger. No bodies, no blood, no signs of forced evacuation. The crew had simply vanished. Meals half-eaten still sat on tables in the mess. Consoles still hummed. Uniforms hung in lockers, untouched. A faint, ambient hum from the station's life support echoed across the empty corridors, making the silence feel manufactured, staged, almost. The team advanced through security levels until they reached the main command deck. Everything was powered. Status lights blinked green across control panels. The command chairs were empty, but not abandoned in haste. It looked like the officers had simply stood up and walked out. Only one terminal had been left on. It wasn't locked. No access key, no clearance gate, just an open display. The message on screen was short. "We remember ARCs." Below it, an image began to resolve. Grainy, low resolution, clearly decades old. A face, male, pale, with close-cropped dark hair, sharp brow, expression unreadable. He wore no insignia, no Dominion uniform. His eyes stared forward, fixed somewhere past the screen, as though waiting to be recognized. The recon team transmitted the image back to Sulvatra, bypassing standard channels. Within hours, cross-analysis began. The face didn't match any active personnel, living or archived. The biometric scan triggered no alerts, but one of the older archivists, someone who had lived through the ARC's reprisal, froze when she saw the face. It took time to verify, and even longer to locate the sealed files. Dominion records concerning the Terran extermination had been locked for over 2 decades under level oblivion classification. When the clearance was finally forced, the match came back confirmed. Darren Voss. The name sent a quiet tremor through strategic command. He wasn't famous, not in the conventional sense. He hadn't led fleets or stood trial or authored manifestos, but in the ARC's archive, a collection of human behavioral analysis and command chain dissection, his name appeared 3 times. Once as a junior systems architect for Earth's cold contingency network. Once as a flagged figure during the last days of Terran transmission traffic. And once more in a sealed subfile marked Directive Blackfield. That last file had no visible content, just the title. No description, no timestamp, no authorship. Only the attached phrase. In case of cultural total loss scenario, initiate substrate continuity, which, whatever it meant, Dominion archivists had never figured it out. They'd assumed it was a failed project, abandoned during the collapse of Sol, but now, with that same forgotten face appearing on a live terminal, the assumption cracked. Praetor Selene was briefed in person. She didn't react outwardly. She merely read the name again, then requested the ARC's reprisal summary be brought into the war chamber. The official narrative was blunt. Earth had resisted too long, refused integration too stubbornly. The Dominion's retaliation had been absolute: planetary bombardment, orbital cleansing, biosphere degradation. Sol had gone dark, and for 23 cycles it had stayed that way. Yet here was a face from the ashes. Not screaming, not begging, not announcing war, just present. That was the part Selene couldn't shake. If Voss had survived, then he had done so without making a sound. He hadn't called for help. He hadn't rallied allies. He hadn't revealed his existence. He had waited. And now, after decades of silence, he had chosen this moment, this collapse, to leave a message inside a command station that no human should have ever reached. "We remember ARCs." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. Not "I remember." We. Selene understood what that implied. Voss wasn't alone. He had never been alone. He had been planning, possibly from the moment the Dominion assumed they had finished him. Directive Blackfield was no contingency. It was a weapon, not made of ships or firepower, but something deeper, something older, a doctrine of disappearance, a system of undoing not armies, but assumptions. The room remained silent as Selene stared at the still image. She didn't blink, didn't speak. She just thought of one thing. If this was the first signal Voss had allowed them to see, how many more had they missed? Darren Voss hadn't expected to survive the Ark's reprisal. No one had. Not after the Dominion's sky-scouring barrage turned orbital habitats to molten slag and sent electromagnetic shockwaves rippling through Sol's inner system. Earth's biosphere boiled. The moon fractured. Mars lost its upper colonies in hours. Voss had watched it all from beneath Olympus Mons, inside a bunker no Dominion surveyor had ever found. The Cold Shadow Initiative had prepared for extinction, not victory, not defense, just the possibility that one voice might remain long enough to remember how the silence began. His first days underground were spent in darkness, not because of system failure, but because he didn't want light. Light reminded him of what used to be above. Light meant someone else might still be watching. It took 32 days before he spoke aloud again. Not to another human, there were none left, but to the array of dormant systems waiting in the sublevels. The initiative hadn't stored weapons. It had stored infrastructure, quiet things, fragile-looking, harmless-seeming, but designed with one principle: survive long enough to matter later. Voss didn't rebuild, he seeded. The first drift nodes were small, ceramic shells barely the size of a shuttle's cargo pod. They were designed to look like debris, move like debris, burn like debris if intercepted. But inside, each node carried precisely what the Dominion never expected: Dominion code. Not just mimicry. Actual Dominion protocols, captured before Earth fell. Operational phrasing, command hierarchies, templates for behavior. Each node had a simple function: reach a position, integrate into open data channels under civilian authority layers, and slowly, over years, inject administrative noise. Not malware, not sabotage, just contradiction. Orders with real formatting but no origin, requests with valid credentials but no trail, truths, spoken in the Dominion's own voice, just at the wrong time, in the wrong sequence, to the wrong recipients. He called them whisper agents. Over time, the noise would grow loud enough that even authentic orders would come under suspicion, and once the Dominion doubted its own logic, it would start chasing itself. Above Mars, in the Lagrange shadows between orbits, Voss deployed something more aggressive. Uncrewed kinetic gliders, black, wedge-shaped, with refractive surface panels, no engines, no drives, just pure drift, launched via magnetic spines buried in the asteroid crust. Their job wasn't attack, it was misdirection. If a Dominion patrol detected one, it would assume cloaking, stealth warfare, forward recon. But the gliders carried nothing, no payload, no brain, just flickering hull distortion and engineered wake trails that suggested presence without proof. A ghost armada meant to trigger responses, fleet deployments, defense shifts, realignment of strategic assets. Each response would feed the next phase. Voss worked alone for years. In the silence of Martian shadow, he monitored Dominion fleet chatter through filtered passive relays. He watched as his earliest agents were ignored, then misunderstood, then slowly elevated to irregular threat. The Dominion never knew where the noise came from. They only knew it started spreading faster than they could isolate. His greatest achievement wasn't infiltration, it was timing. Every false flare he launched coincided with real Dominion operations. His codes didn't override, they interwove. That was the brilliance. The Dominion followed its own instructions into confusion. Directive Blackfield wasn't designed for vengeance, it was designed for erosion. Voss knew the Dominion couldn't be broken by weapons. They'd destroyed stronger civilizations than Earth before breakfast, but they depended on certainty. Chain of command, synchronization of vision. If that could be degraded slowly, quietly, they'd collapse long before they ever noticed anyone had pushed. He didn't need a fleet. He needed their memory to stutter. The psychological doctrine was older than Voss. He hadn't invented the concept of perceptual collapse, but he had perfected it in application. Target a civilization's decision architecture, not its weapons. Rewire behavior through exposure to minor contradictions, nudge response timing off by a fraction, delay clarity by a breath, confuse verification chains. The power wasn't in the lie, it was in the doubt that followed. By the time Dominion analysts saw the wedge-shaped vessels drift past their patrol zones, they were already compromised. Every reaction had already been rehearsed. Every signal they sent confirmed patterns Voss's agents had mapped decades ago. He wasn't watching them respond. He was testing whether the infection had taken root. It had. The moment Dominion fleet started chasing ghosts and intercepting phantom orders, he initiated the second phase, the null routing. Voss had built what he called mirror sinks, invisible logic tunnels embedded in the Dominion's own jump network via embedded fleet protocols. Once activated, these tunnels could hijack real navigational requests and subtly reroute fleet exit vectors without triggering error codes. No damage, no sabotage, just redirection into deep, uncharted drift space, regions where Dominion comms didn't reach, where isolation scrubbed systems clean, where ships forgot where they came from. And as Dominion commanders reported back confused and corrupted data from fleets that never arrived, Voss said nothing. He didn't claim credit. He didn't threaten. That would imply he wanted to be acknowledged. He didn't. He wanted them to keep guessing. He watched from a small dust-covered console in the bunker's main chamber. His hands didn't tremble. His breath remained calm. Across the room, a single phrase remained etched above the main relay terminal, carved in to the steel by hand during those first days underground when Earth's sky had already burned. We remember arcs. Voss never expected the Dominion to remember Earth, but he would make sure they remembered the silence that followed. By the time the Dominion realized what was happening, they had already started shooting at shadows. It began in Sector Thalor, where a patrol corvette flagged a hostile signature approaching from the outer orbital plane. Standard heat map parameters showed high-velocity objects breaching no-fly zones. Fleet Command authorized warning fire. What followed wasn't battle, it was confusion. 3 separate vessels across 2 task groups independently reported targets in incompatible positions. Visual confirmation failed. Tactical AI requested clarification, received contradictory inputs, and escalated to engagement protocols. When the corvettes fired, there was nothing there. No return fire, no wreckage, only silence and a growing sense that reality had stopped obeying. Across 3 more sectors, similar incidents unfolded. Heat trails that didn't align with mass signatures, weapons platforms that registered impacts with no physical collision. Drones were dispatched to investigate and returned footage of empty sky. Recon logs stopped matching local memory banks. Fleet formations began redirecting based on faulty beacon pings. One squadron even maneuvered to intercept itself, chasing a recorded flare only to find it had been their own from 42 minutes earlier, mirrored by a falsified data pulse. The Dominion military had been trained for warfare, not illusion. Its strength was scale, tens of thousands of ships coordinated through centralized commands, synchronized by time-locked strategy templates. That foundation fractured quickly once the timing slipped. Fleets operating on conflicting schedules began to overlap or diverge in ways that made coordination impossible. Messages took too long to authenticate, and orders arrived out of context. Officers began ignoring transmissions entirely, unsure what was real. No one could verify who was still in charge. Praetor Selene, now weeks into a sleepless cycle, gave one final order in defiance of the unraveling. Dispatch a full armada to Sol. 40 ships, mixed carrier and assault class, with advanced signal scrubbers and hardwired deadman loops. Their mission was not war, it was confirmation. Eyes on target, proof that Earth still existed, or didn't. That something could be touched, measured, destroyed, if necessary. The armada jumped at 0900. It never arrived. At first, Dominion navigational oversight assumed a delay, then a routing error. But the ships never exited into Sol space. Not a single signature breached the perimeter. No emergency pings, no black box telemetry. Every trace of the fleet's jump entry vanished into a blind vector the Dominion didn't recognize. When routing logs were recovered from the jump control nodes, they had been modified, internally, cleanly, without breach signatures. The destination coordinates still read Sol system, but the route had diverged just past the mid-vector, curved subtly toward deep drift sectors no Dominion vessel had charted in decades. It wasn't sabotage, it was redirection. When a counter-jump was ordered to trace the fleet's path, the coordinates collapsed. Literally. Jump AI refused the input, citing paradoxical vectors, temporal loops, location unresolvable. When Dominion Command forced the entry anyway, the AI scrubbed the request mid-compile and returned a single line. Target system non-localized. The phrase hadn't been programmed. No engineer recognized it. It wasn't an error code, it was a classification. Sol had become a phantom coordinate. That night, internal archivists began reviewing Dominion star maps. One by one, they noticed something odd. In the galactic mid-plane grid, between coordinates long associated with Earth, there was now a blank. No label, no sector tags, no notations. The space was marked, but nameless. At first, it appeared to be a display glitch, until the archivists realized the blank wasn't static. It had replaced Earth in every digital archive, every strategic record, every trade route map, even educational atlases. Automatically, silently, uniformly. When they tried to revert, the files refused, restorations initiated, then failed, access denied. When a hard copy was referenced for correction, the moment it was scanned into the network, the scanned version erased the data and re-uploaded itself as blank. Earth hadn't just gone missing. It had been overwritten. Selen stood before the Dominion's High Council as she explained what had happened. No visuals, no voice recordings. Just reports and absences, an entire fleet gone without resistance. A homeworld vanished not through power, but absence. She told them the truth with the weight of finality in her voice. Earth had not attacked. Earth had not returned. Earth had not spoken. It had erased itself. Or worse, it had erased them from it. The Council did not ask for details. They asked for silence. The matter was not to be discussed beyond the chamber. All operations directed towards Sol were suspended indefinitely. The system was to be treated as an informatic dead zone. No ship would approach, no probe would be launched, not for security, for containment. Contact was no longer a threat. It was a contagion. By the next cycle, standard Dominion fleet doctrine updated across all command channels. The update carried no preamble, no justification. Just a single addendum in red. Sol system, classified vector null, do not pursue. And so, for the first time in Dominion history, a system was removed not by force, but by uncertainty. Not a victory, not a defeat, just absence. Oz hadn't destroyed their empire. He had made them forget what they had once destroyed. Directive null passed with no objections. Praetor Selene's voice didn't rise during the announcement, nor did the High Council question the order. It wasn't fear that moved them, it was fatigue. Dominion leaders, military strategists, and information architects had reached the limits of understanding. The Sol system no longer fit within their reality model. It defied logic without breaking it. It twisted protocol without leaving fingerprints. And worst of all, it refused to speak. Not a message, not a demand, not a threat. Just a vacuum, precise, intentional, and self-replicating. The more they tried to observe it, the less they remembered what they were looking for. By week's end, Dominion fleet doctrine was amended in all sectors. The directive was brief and final. No vessel, manned or unmanned, was to approach Sol coordinates under any circumstance. All nav charts would route around the sector. All inquiries into pre-directive data were flagged as containment breaches. The system's official designation was no longer Earth. That name no longer appeared. It had been reclassified under a new entry, Informatic Threat Construct, Vector Null. What had once been a civilization was now a cautionary placeholder, not a people, not a planet, a zone of contamination, contact not prohibited for tactical reasons, but ontological ones. You didn't look because looking changed you. You didn't speak of it because remembering made you unstable. Earth had become something worse than an enemy. It had become an anomaly, a reminder that some systems couldn't be controlled, only erased. Selene retired from public life shortly after. No speech, no ceremonial procession. One morning she was there, the next, her position had been reassigned. No explanation. Most assumed her final act, the sealing of the soul files, was her exit. She had seen too much, or perhaps more accurately, she had seen just enough to know how close they had come to vanishing, not in fire, but in confusion. She left behind one untraceable message in the Council Archive's private system. 5 words, unsigned. Absence is the final perimeter. Without a central adversary to rally against, Dominion cohesion began to fracture. Not at the surface, there were no rebellions or wars, but deeper, within the consensus of thought. Officials disagreed on what Earth had been. Academics proposed contradictory timelines. Archivists quietly admitted certain events no longer lined up with existing records. Historians speculated that Earth had never existed at all, that the destruction of Sol had been misfiled, or perhaps fabricated. Whole departments stopped using the term Terran. A few simply left the subject blank when it arose. Across subject worlds, cultural shifts rippled. Statues to Dominion conquest were quietly taken down, not out of rebellion, but uncertainty. If you couldn't remember what you had won, why celebrate the victory? A strange reverence emerged in silence. Children began calling the blank section of the star map the still point. It became a superstition. Cartographers stopped drawing it. Educators skipped over it. Starship instructors trained navigators to curve past the vector without asking why. Years passed. In a minor outer academy, a child named Eason studied galactic history for the first time. He stared at the holographic star chart, bright with labeled sectors, trade corridors, and Dominion fleet paths. In the center of it all, between the spiral arms, was a void. Not dark, just blank. It pulsed softly, like something trying not to be seen. He raised his hand and pointed. "Why is there nothing here?" he asked. The instructor paused, not in confusion, in calculation. For a long moment, no one answered. Then the instructor adjusted the display subtly, overlaying a new layer that simply drew the child's attention elsewhere. A mining colony, a neutral trade zone. The moment passed. Eisen looked again later. The blank was still there. Far away, beneath the dust-stained capital of Sulvatra, in what remained of a cracked monument once built to celebrate Dominion ascendancy over the mid-rim, someone had returned. The engraving had not been commissioned. It had not been witnessed. No one knew who carved it, but there it was, etched into the crumbling stone. "You erased our sky, so we learned how to erase yours." No signature, no trace, just a truth too dangerous to name, left behind by someone who never needed to be seen again. What did you think of Earth's silent revenge? Was Commander Voss a hero, a ghost, or something else entirely? Could your civilization survive a war it never saw coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy high-stakes, mind-bending human victory stories like this, smash that subscribe button.